The lunch crowd flowed like a river, and the old woman stood in it like a stone. She turned in a small circle on the corner by the sandwich shop, clutching her handbag to her chest and blinking hard, as if the street signs would come into focus if she just stared them into obedience. People streamed around her, eyes on screens, mouths on coffee, earbuds locking the day to a private soundtrack. A bike bell chimed, a bus sighed at the curb, someone laughed too loudly, and her whisper disappeared under it all. Across the street on the church steps a man watched. He was the kind of man the city edited out of its postcards, sleeping where stone kept a little of yesterday's warmth, layered in a coat that used to fit someone else. He had a name he still answered to when it was spoken right: Marcus. Winter had trained him to notice what others missed, because when you live at the edges, you learn the shape of the middle by its shadows. He saw the tremor in the old woman's hands, and the way her shoes pointed in two different directions like arguments. He rose, shook last night's stiffness from his knees, and crossed between impatient taxes. He approached slowly, hands open, voice low enough to land softly. "Do you need help finding someone?" The old woman met his eyes with a look that was clear and lost at the same time. "Astercourt," she said. "I was headed to Astercourt." The words skittered like coins she kept dropping. Marcus knew the city by benches and bus lines, and places that looked friendly until after dark. Astercourt lived 3 neighborhoods and 1 river away. "Let's get you warm first," he said. He guided her to the sandwich shop window where the heater leaked, kindness onto the sidewalk, and bought her tea with the coins he had saved for soup. Steam rose between them, and the shaking in her fingers softened. "I'm Evelyn," she said, surprised to hear her own name, spoken aloud as if it had been stored on a high shelf. "Marcus," he replied, and meant his name like a promise. "Do you have anything with your address?" She dug in her bag and produced a little case with a card. Evelyn Hart, Astercourt, followed by a phone number. Marcus dialed on the store's courtesy phone. Cheerful music, then voicemail. He left a message and another with the building office. "They'll call back," he said. "Until then, I'm with you." He moved to stand on the windy side, taking the cold so she didn't have to, and matched his stride to her careful steps. A security guard at the subway frowned on instinct when he saw their clothes next to each other. "She's my neighbor," Marcus said evenly. "We're headed home." The guard hesitated, then looked at Evelyn's face and stepped aside. On the train, a child wordlessly peeled a gold sticker star from a sheet and handed it to Evelyn. She put it on her glove like a medal. "I used to give stars," she murmured, "to my students when their hands remembered where Middle C lived. You were a teacher." "Piano," she said, and her mouth found a smile that didn't belong to this station. Marcus pictured the old church basement upright across from the soup line. 3 stubborn keys that refused to be anything but honest. He hummed a scale to fill the silence. She hummed the next one as if a muscle memory had woken up, and for 30 seconds 2 strangers shared a song while the city blurred past in its metal tunnel. They surfaced at Riverside and Maple, where the river threw knives of light against the buildings and found Astercourt leaning into its years with brick shoulders. The intercom crackled like a bad memory and then ignored them. Marcus cupped his hands and called into the courtyard. A window slid open. A woman leaned out and gasped as if the air itself had become useful again. "Evelyn, we've been looking for you." She buzzed them in and met them at the lobby with a coat over pajamas and gratitude so quick it tripped. "I should have watched her better," the neighbor said, half to Marcus and half to herself. "She wonders when the calendar changes." Marcus settled Evelyn into a chair near the mailboxes. She patted the armrest like it was an old friend that had been sitting there waiting. A man rushed in, hair storm-blown, worry still running. "Mom," he said, dropping to one knee. The room became smaller around the word. Evelyn's face loosened. Her hands found his shoulders like they had done it 1,000 times on better days. The man looked up at Marcus. "I'm Daniel Hart. Thank you." He tried to hand him money. Marcus lifted a palm. "I could use a shower," he said carefully, "and a phone call someone will answer." Daniel nodded as if he had been waiting to be told exactly what help looks like. "Both? And dinner, please." The apartment smelled faintly of lemon oil and sheet music. On a piano near the window sat a black and white photo. Evelyn with a semicircle of children, tiny hands hovering over keys. A little boy at the edge wore a serious expression, as if sound needed concentration to behave. Marcus stared until the past aligned. "Community center on 12th, he said. "Saturdays." Evelyn's eyebrows climbed. "Yes, I taught there, until my knees started arguing." "Why?" Marcus touched the corner of the photo. "You taught a boy who always took the chipped bench by the radiator because it was warm. You said he had stubborn fingers and a careful heart. You taught him Ode to Joy and told him not to bully it." The laugh that rose in his throat surprised them both. Evelyn peered closer. "Then I must have liked him," she said. Daniel returned with towels and a soft t-shirt. Hot water hit Marcus's back like forgiveness. He stood under it longer than courtesy recommends and came out scrubbed into a person even he recognized. At dinner, Daniel dialed the numbers from the messages and confirmed a building aide would start mornings. He rubbed his forehead and looked at Marcus. "Do you know anyone who can fix small things? The sink weeps, the vent complains, the door thinks it's a drum. I used to do maintenance at a hotel," Marcus said. Before the hours got strange, Daniel's shoulders dropped. "I could pay you to help here and maybe in the building if the super approves. Start tomorrow." Tomorrow had been a stranger to Marcus for a long time. "Yes," he said, and felt the floor steady. He recaulked the sink and quieted the vent by shimming a loose cover. He tamed the door with felt pads and an apology. He tightened a bolt under the piano bench and crowned it with a washer like a simple courage. "Play something," Evelyn asked, tapping the wood. Marcus stumbled through the melody he had once learned in a room that smelled like dust and effort. Evelyn filled the gaps with the left hand that had taught so many children to trust the low notes. Daniel leaned in the doorway and forgot to blink until the piece ended by agreeing with itself. Days learned a pattern. Marcus came in the mornings to walk Evelyn in the courtyard when the sun warmed the brick, naming trees like cousins because she liked the sound of names. Some days the fog in her mind was thick, and she asked where the school was and whether the spring recital had cookies. Some days it thinned, and she told stories about a boy who made up harmonies and swore he had discovered a new chord, even though Batch had beaten him to it by 300 years. Marcus fixed what complained. He labeled a breaker box clearly. He replaced a screaming smoke detector battery and was rewarded with silence that felt like blessing. He started leaving notes for the super that read like respect instead of correction. The super began leaving him tasks with thank you scribbled at the bottom. On a stormy night, the building sighed, and the lights went out with the kind of sudden that teaches you what you lean on. Evelyn panicked at the dark, the way a child does when the room turns unfamiliar. Marcus flicked on his phone flashlight and sang the scale again, slow. Her breathing matched the notes even before the generator coughed awake. Maintenance arrived late. Daniel arrived early. "I need you here," he said simply, and the words slid into a place in Marcus's chest that had been waiting. A week later, the building offered him the small utility room at the back of the first floor, painted cream decades ago, with a window that looked at a square of sky and the tops of people's shoes. It came with a key that turned. Marcus moved in with a backpack, a photo of the piano class that Daniel had printed for him, and a mug someone had left on the church steps with "Good morning," written so cheerfully that it felt like a dare. He slept that night with rain arguing softly against the glass, and woke before the alarm out of habit and discovered there was, for the first time in a long time, nothing to run from. Evelyn's wandering did not vanish. Some days she forgot names and invented new ones that somehow fit. But she began wandering toward the lobby, where Marcus kept a basket of folded maps he made with thick marker. Little arrows from the elevator to the mailboxes, to the piano, to the courtyard bench, labeled the sunny one. He taught her to check the bracelet with her address that Daniel ordered, and when she remembered, she patted it proudly like a good grade. Once, at the Saturday market, she drifted toward a booth with a toy keyboard and pressed a key. The vendor frowned at the blur of her hands until Marcus appeared and said she taught half the neighborhood to play. The vendor softened, found a chair, and let her direct small customers in a duet of patience and sound. People in the building learned Marcus's name the way they learn where the light switches are. The lawyer on 2 called him when a window stuck. The nurse on 4 left extra soup outside his door after late shifts. The super lectured less and listened more. And Daniel, who had been holding his breath since the first time his mother forgot the kettle on, exhaled in increments and began to sleep through the night. One day the church, where Marcus used to bed down, asked if he could look at the basement piano. The soup volunteers sometimes gathered around. He tuned what he could, slipped felt under a pedal that squeaked like an opinion, and placed a jar next to the sheet music labeled Strings and Things. A month later, the jar bought 3 new keys and a Saturday hour where kids from Astor Court and the shelter tried scales with the seriousness of scientists. When the city's heat finally loosened its fist, the courtyard turned generous. Evelyn sat with Marcus under a crooked maple, naming the clouds by what they looked like instead of what they were. He told her she had once called his stubborn fingers a gift, and she patted his hand and said, "Then don't return it." On the anniversary of the day, everyone else walked past. Daniel insisted on a small celebration. He brought a cake that looked like a piano and tasted like sugar, deciding to be useful. He clinked a spoon to a glass and said to the friends who had wandered in from their doors that a year ago, a man who slept on stone saw the one person who needed to be. Seen most and everything after that was only a series of reasonable decisions. Marcus raised his mug and felt something steady and simple in himself answer back. He did not become a different person all at once. Stories that claim that are selling you lightning when most change is weather. But he became the person he had been before fear built a fence. He learned the sound of a key turning and the weight of being expected. He learned how to answer a knock at his own door. And every so often, when the lunch crowd flowed like a river and the city forgot to look, he would pause by the corner where it had begun and stand still long enough to notice, but didn't know where to go. Then he would cross the street the way he had before, hands open, voice soft enough to land. And the river, for a moment, would remember to make room.